thanks very much. Thanks for having me. It's kind of exciting to see the entire room full. Near as I can tell, there are no empty chairs, which speaks well. So in some ways, it's not a hard topic. Right? Security lessons in 2013. We've had one very, very large security lesson, and that's due to the documents of the NSA revealed by Edward Snowden. And the lesson is that the NSA has turned the internet into a giant surveillance platform. That's a simple lesson, but the details are actually complicated and interesting. The NSA has turned the internet into a giant surveillance platform. And it's one that's very robust. It's robust politically, it's robust legally, and it's robust technically. And I can tell you 3 different programs the NSA has to get at your Gmail using different technical capabilities, different U.S. legal authorities, and collaborations with different companies. It's sort of surprising, but it seems that if you are an agency with the budget of the NSA, and you're given a choice of do it this way or do it that way, you do it both. Because you might lose the way. And we're seeing some of that now in the various, I'm not going to call them negotiations, but some of the political maneuverings in the United States, where different authorities and different capabilities are being questioned and challenged and possibly revoked. My belief is that's going to make no difference, because there's so much redundancy in the capabilities. Right? So we know this is true for Google email user data. I'm sure this is true for cell phone data, for other internet data, for pretty much everything. That there is this robustness. And the robustness is due to the architecture of the net, which is something I'm going to talk about a little bit later. In Washington, if you watch the debate, the NSA continues to lie about its capabilities. I mean, even to this day. And I saw something from a couple of days ago. And they're very careful. Right? It's hiding behind interpretations of the words collect, or incidentally, or target, or directed. But you have to very carefully parse the words to understand what's being said and what's being not said. That programs are cloaked behind multiple code names to hide their full extent and full capabilities. Not just from the press, who really was supposed to never know, but from actual legal congressional oversight. And a lot of these things are hidden. Whenever you hear someone from the U.S. defense establishment say that something is being done, quote, not under this program, unquote, you should be 100% sure that it's being done under some other program. Right? There's actually no other reason to use those words. The NSA, what's clear from the documents, and I think that this is important, is that the NSA's mission is to collect everything. Everything. We just heard last week of the capabilities the NSA has, and to some unnamed country, we all think it's Afghanistan, to collect every phone call. Voice, not just metadata, voice, and store it for a month to be able to do searches. Right? So that kind of capability, and I was trying to figure out when that capability was. I think it was 2008. Right? And expanding that, more countries, more time, is just a matter of hard drive space. But that sort of capability is fundamentally the NSA's mission. And you see it permeating the documents. There are slogans like collect it all, or know it all, or exploit it all. And these are the missions. You know it from sort of the weird fringy missions, where the NSA thinks about all these isolated pockets of communications. There's a program to deal with the communications when you are flying when you're in an airplane and you're using the Wi-Fi to ground, right? That particular communications channel. Or the chat capabilities in virtual worlds. There was a story that got a lot of, I think, humorous press of the NSA eavesdropping on World of Warcraft. I mean, and yes, that's funny, but if you think about it, if your mission is to know it all, that there is this communications channel, regardless of where it's embedded, where you don't know it, that's bad. And so you have to eavesdrop on World of Warcraft, because you can imagine the bad guys using it to communicate. And to understand that mission, you need to understand the NSA's history. I think there's not enough being talked about the context of this. The NSA was born during the Cold War, where there was, for good reason, a strong interest in the Soviet Union and what they were saying. Right? And it bordered on voyeuristic. We wanted to collect everything being said there because they were the great enemy. Right? So we collected a lot of data. And some of it useful, some of it not. Turned out it was a lot easier to understand the capabilities of a new tank or a new aircraft than it was to predict the fall of communism. Right? So tactically you got a lot of data, strategically not so much. So you had this collected all mission focused on a particular set of countries. Right? The Warsaw Pact, China, North Korea, certain countries that were the strategic enemies of the United States. When communism falls, the NSA flounders, and during those years, you had a much greater ascendance of the protect mission of the NSA. You had the rise of their defensive computing centers. You had a lot more openness. You saw a lot more NSA employees at cryptography meetings. And you did see a shift inside the NSA, but then the terrorist attacks 9/11 happened, and that changed everything. And what happened was the intelligence community was given an impossible mission. The mission was never again. Right? Make sure this doesn't happen again. And if you think about it, if you give someone the impossible goal of making sure something never happens, the only way you could even remotely have a hope of achieving even a piece of that is to know everything that does happen. So suddenly the NSA's mission becomes vitally important. And that great all-seeing eye, which was laser focused on the Soviet Union, now is turned even on the United States and onto the entire world. Because nobody knows where the next thing is coming from. Nobody knows who the next bad guy is. And the mission is fundamentally impossible. But the only response is to eavesdrop on everything. And then the NSA was completely unbalanced, and eavesdrop and attack became the norm, and everything else was secondary. Meanwhile, in the corporate world, on the internet, technologically, we're aiding this. And the natural trends of IT are making the NSA's job easier. I mean, think about data and data production. Data is a natural byproduct of the information society. Right? Everything that involves a computer produces some sort of transaction record. And whether it's making a telephone call, or purchasing something with a credit card, using some kind of automatic fare collection system. Processes that used to be physical processes, anonymous cash processes, walking into a bookstore as opposed to buying something on Amazon, right, became computerized processes, and that produces data. And data is a byproduct of most of our IT socialization. And computers are mediating most of our human interactions, most of our business interactions. We don't have face-to-face meetings. We have them on Google Hangouts. We have them on Skype. We have them on email, on chat, and Facebook, and LinkedIn. All of those things produce data. Right? Produce data about what's going on. Produce surveillance data. And that data mostly used to be thrown away. But Moore's law continues. Data storage basically drops to free. Data processing drops to free. And it's suddenly easier to save everything than it is to throw stuff away. You all know this. I very clearly remember the year when I stopped sorting my email and started saving everything. I actually looked recently. It was 2006. Before 2006, I had hundreds of mailboxes. After, I had one. Because at 2006, for me, search became cheaper than sort. Right? The dates are different, but that line is crossed pretty much everywhere. It is cheaper to save everything than to figure out what to save. Right? The cost of saving is so cheap, the marginal value of the data has to be so cheap before you just save it. So we're saving everything. Right? We're leaving these digital footprints all throughout our lives. Right? Remember, the NSA really didn't wake up and say, let's eavesdrop on everybody. They woke up and said, wow, corporations are eavesdropping on everybody. Let's just get ourselves a copy. Right? And suddenly that's a lot easier. And this wholesale surveillance makes more things possible. Right? The notion of wholesale surveillance, that you can follow everybody, that you can surveil someone backwards in time, that you can do some of these correlative about searches. You can look at someone you're interested in and who they talk to and who they talk to and who they talk to. We learned from there's a Washington Post story on the NSA's location database from cell phone data. Right? We all carry a tracking device with us 24/7. And the phone company knows we are all in this room. Right? And we are being surveilled here. Probably all of us. Probably no one here doesn't have a cell phone. Right? The NSA collects that data, and they do all sorts of interesting queries on it. Who's near each other? Who's coming towards each other, turning their phones off, and then turning them on later? Who's having secret meetings? Who's leaving their phones at home once in a while? And you can do some of this stuff once you have all the data. But those sorts of things are impossible under the old way of doing surveillance, which is follow that person. And ubiquitous surveillance changes things. And it's not just the NSA. Most of these capabilities exist in the corporate world. For pretty much every NSA surveillance program I found, there are corporate analogs who are doing the same thing for profit. They're not looking for the same characteristics, but they have the same capabilities. Right? In the corporate world, the goal is psychological manipulation. Right? The goal is advertising. But the same data is being collected, the same data is being used. The only difference seems to be the amount of database storage that's available. Google isn't building the Utah data facility that the NSA is, but their capabilities are close. And a lot of companies are doing the same. So you fundamentally have a public-private surveillance partnership. Right? There is a basic alliance of corporate and government interests here. And we've built an internet where we spy on people in exchange for services. And that's a big deal. I mean, this is truly the golden age of surveillance. Because simply we have allowed ourselves to be put under constant surveillance. And do not be fooled by the it's only metadata argument. We saw that in the U.S. very, very, very quickly. It's only metadata. President Obama said, no one is listening any of your phone calls. He said it twice, and it bothers me that he always used the verb listened each time. Not that nobody's recording, not that nobody's transcribing, not that nobody's analyzing, nobody's listening. I believe if we learned that they were recording, doing automatic voice to text, analyzing and reading, he would claim he didn't lie. But when verbs are carefully chosen, I now worry. And I think we have reason to. Especially because now we know that the NSA has the capability to record an entire nation's phone calls if it wants to. Right? Metadata equals surveillance. And the easy thought experiment is imagine that you hired a private detective to eavesdrop on someone. And that detective will put a bug in their home, in their office, in their car, would tap their cell phone. You'd get a report of the conversations. If you imagine that same detective, you hired him to put that person under surveillance, you get a different report. You get a report about where he went, who he spoke to, what he did, what he read, what he purchased. Right? That's all metadata. And metadata is data about context. It's data about what we do, what we care about, who we care about. It's fundamentally surveillance data. And what's not being reported, and I hope will come out soon, is information about how the data is being used. We get a lot of reports about what's being collected, and a lot less about how it's being analyzed. And I hope we see a lot more of that. Because I think the real stories are in how it's being correlated, and how the different data streams are being put together to get a more complete surveillance picture of people. And it's important, while these documents give us an extraordinary window into the NSA, this is actually not about the NSA. It's not about the US or about, but it is and it isn't. Because what we're seeing is what any nation state would do. And even if you are a fan of the United States, a fan of the NSA, don't care about NSA surveillance, these things should be concerning because they are not the exclusive purview of the NSA. We now know a lot about how quantum works. Quantum is basically the way the NSA weaponizes the internet. It's an in-network packet injection tool used for a variety of purposes. The hacker tool is called AirPawn. It came out before Snowden's stories. If you want to have your own little quantum in this room, you can download it, you can use it, you can own everybody else. Right? I mean, the NSA program is also, it's certainly better than the NSA. They have a way bigger budget, but it's not different. Right? China uses the same technology in its Great Firewall. As we learn about these NSA capabilities, keep in mind that others are using them as well, that they're not somehow unique. And in some ways that's surprising. We have not seen anything the NSA does that we looked at and said, wow, I never thought of that. We look at it and say, wow, you guys got a big budget. But they're not different. Right? We know China, Russia, France, Israel, any of the big countries doing spying use the same technologies. And we also know that technology democratizes. Right? Today's secret NSA programs are tomorrow's PhD theses and the next day's hacker tools. And one of the ways to think about these documents, these programs, these capabilities we're learning about the NSA is it's like a 1 to 3 year window into what the criminals are going to be doing. And which means we have a duty, regardless of what we think of the NSA, to defend against them. And this is fundamental harm here. This is why this is so bad. We've fundamentally built an insecure internet. We've built an internet that enables this kind of global surveillance, that enables this panopticon. Right? And the NSA surveillance is just showing us that. Right, and that's also our choice. I mean, our choice, in the United States at least, the debate is always characterized as, should the NSA be able to spy or not? I think that's the wrong debate. The debate is, should we have an internet that is vulnerable to all attackers, or an internet that is secure for all users? Right, that's our choice. Is everybody spying or nobody spying? Because you can't have the NSA spying without China spying also. You can either have both or none. Now there's some good news, bad news. I mean, the good news, we learned in Edward Snowden's first interview after his name became public. And I'm going to read the quote. He said, "Encryption works. Properly implemented strong crypto systems are one of the few things you can rely on." And we know this is true. We know this from the NSA's attempts to break Tor, the anonymity tool. Right? The NSA can't break Tor and it pisses them off. We learn this from the NSA's program to collect contact lists and buddy lists from the Internet backbone. From the user connections between your browser and the servers of Google and Yahoo and other companies. And in that document, there's an interesting table which showed how much data the NSA collected from the various different service providers. And they got about 10 times the data from Yahoo as from Google, which if you think about it makes no sense because Google's probably 10 times the size Yahoo is. But at the time when that table was written, Google was using SSL and Yahoo wasn't. Right? So the Yahoo traffic was much more vulnerable. This is a lesson from the Muscular program, which is the NSA's program to get at Google data from the trunks between their data centers. There's a great handwritten diagram which points to the part of the protocol where Google removes SSL, thereby allowing the NSA to eavesdrop. And so again and again, we see that encryption frustrates the NSA, at least at scale. Individually, it seems not to. We can talk about that later. But at scale, it does. The bad news was in actually the very next sentence of Edward Snowden's interview, when he said, "Unfortunately, endpoint security is so terrifically weak that the NSA can frequently find ways around it." The NSA seems to be able to ignore cryptography, not by breaking it, but by getting around it. Now, we do know that there is some piece of cryptanalysis that the NSA has. And we in the community have always thought this was true. I mean, we know they make a huge investment in mathematics. They hire like the top 10% of all mathematicians in the US every year. Now, presumably they're not doing nothing. And there's a really interesting sentence. James Clapper, he's the US Director of National Intelligence, in the Black Budget, which is the secret classified intelligence budget, which we saw the first few pages of, he has an introduction. And there's a sentence in it, and it's kind of an isolated sentence. I'm going to read it because I think the words are important. He's talking about cryptography. And he says, "We are investing in groundbreaking cryptanalytic capabilities to defeat adversarial cryptography and exploit internet traffic." Now, those are interesting words. It doesn't sound like he's saying, we're hiring a bunch of really smart guys and hoping they get lucky. He seems to be saying, we've got some piece of math, and we're solving the engineering problem. And whether that's building the fast computer, the big memory store, the huge data interconnect, whatever it is, right? That we've got something, and we are building we are investing in groundbreaking cryptanalytic capabilities. Right? We've got the theory, we're putting it into practice. I think it's a plausible way to read that. And there's some guesses we have as to what that is. But there's something there. But even with all of that, we do know that most of how the NSA breaks crypto is by getting around it. Exploiting bad implementations, exploiting default or weak keys, sabotaging standards, deliberately inserting backdoors, exploiting inadvertently installed backdoors, and what they call exfiltrating keys, which is their word for stealing them. Even with that, mostly the NSA relies on unencrypted streams of data, and there are a lot of them. Right? Most of the internet is not encrypted. Most cloud services aren't encrypted. Cell phone data, cell phone metadata, not encrypted. Most third-party data, not encrypted. There it is. Right? We've simply made bulk collection too easy. Right? And this speaks to the solution. Right? We built a world where it is easier for the NSA to spy on everybody to focus. Right? And that's where we object. Right? The Snowden document said the NSA was spying on North Korea and the Taliban. Nobody would care. Right? It said they're spying on Belgium. I mean, that's why we're objecting. That they're spying on everybody. And it's simply because of the way the economics works. Right? And this is an important point. Right? The NSA might have a larger budget than every other intelligence agency in the world combined. They do. But they are not made of magic. And if we are to secure the internet, we have to leverage the economics and the physics and the math. Right? I mean, I don't think we can ever is a bad word. In the near term, I don't think we can design an internet that is secure from targeted attack. Right? We know this from all the work in cyber criminals and other national intelligence agencies, like U.S. and otherwise. And that on the net right now, attack is easier than defense, and we just don't have the science to build systems that are secure against focused targeted attacks. There's just too many ways in. Complexity is too great. There's no theory of defense. We're just doing our best. But we can build an internet that is secure against bulk collection. And that's where I think our real lessons of 2013 are, and our real marching orders to the future. Right? That we need to force all of these adversaries, like the NSA, other countries, cyber criminals, to target. Right? Because that makes us secure. It just limits what the bad guys can do. Yeah, and there are a bunch of tech we're looking at. The IETF is trying to look at protocols. Other organizations are. Right? Redesigning protocols so that we have ubiquitous encryption on the backbone. Have perfect forward secrecy wherever possible, so that stealing a key at time T doesn't compromise security at some later time. Right? Redesigning products and services so that there is usable communications encryption. And the lesson of about 20 years of PGP is that one-click email encryption is one click too hard for most people. Right? On the other hand, if you're using chat, a really great program, OTR, off the record, will encrypt your chat sessions, trivially easy to use, and it's getting a lot of use because it's so easy. There are a bunch of other programs. Leap is one that comes to mind. We need more endpoint security. I think the moral of hard drive encryption is that it's real easy, it works. And now we saw it embedded in the operating systems as of a few years ago, and a lot more people are using it. Right, we need more cloud encryption. Right now it's very hard. We are seeing some Dropbox alternatives that do encryption natively, but we need more of that. And more open standards, more open source, gives more visibility into how things are working. Target dispersal.